your host, Mr. Hill, and in today's episode, we are going to be starting right from the very beginning. We're going to be looking at the cell structure, which is Key Area 1 of Unit 1. Now, the way these videos work, I will be explaining some of the fundamental points that underpin the National 5 course here in Scotland. Please feel free to pause, rewind, skip, make notes, replay the video at your leisure. The whole point of this is to help you with your revision and just to help consolidate some of your understanding on the key topics that are covered in the course. Now, if you're watching from outside Scotland, that's cool. Pull up a chair, make yourself at home. But be aware that we are talking mainly about the course structure in Scotland. But of course, the cell science and the science in general will be able to be applied in whatever course you're studying around the world. Now, if you like what you've heard, please do subscribe, click on the alarm bell so you don't miss a future episode, and do tell everybody who's doing biology to tune in to help with their revision for the National 5 Biology. So, without further ado, let's make a start with looking at the animal cell.
So, welcome to the first part of this episode, where we're going to begin by looking at the animal cell. Now, the animal cell has this sort of fried egg sort of appearance that we use when describing what the features are inside an animal cell. In reality, of course, lots of different cells have different specialisms, and we'll cover that in a future episode. But when we're labeling the different sort of prominent features of a cell, we stick to this sort of fried egg sort of appearance. Now, as you can see on the screen, there are a number of different features. We're now going to describe them, and we're going to label them. So why don't you go ahead and draw yourself an animal cell, and then when you're ready, we can resume, and we will label up what each bit is and what each bit does. Okay, we're going to describe their functions too. So let's make a start then with the green outline. So the green outline is the cell membrane, and the cell's membrane's function is to control what goes in and goes out of the cell. Okay, so our next episode is going to look at this in a lot more detail, but essentially what it does, it controls what molecules enter and leave. And every type of cell has a cell membrane. Okay, so the next feature, which is found in animal cells and plant cells, is the purple structure here, which I'm sure you know is labeled up as the nucleus. Now, the nucleus is membrane bound, has a membrane around it, and it contains genetic information. And this genetic information is then used by this cell to code for proteins. Now, that genetic information is in the form of DNA, and DNA is found as chromosomes. Okay, so in a human cell, there'll be 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs, and a chromosome is a long chain of DNA, so a linear chain, we say. Okay, so it's a sort of long chain of DNA, and that codes for proteins. Right, the next feature that we have is the internal sort of jelly-like structure inside a cell, and all cell types have these, and this is the cytoplasm. Cyto just means cell, okay? And the cytoplasm essentially is where everything is found, but it's also where lots of reactions take place. So we can say reactions occur here, okay? As well as all the other stuff kind of floating around in it. Okay, next we have these little blue dots. Okay, these little blue dots here represent our ribosomes. And again, ribosomes are found in all cell types. And this is the site of protein synthesis. And again, we're going to do a whole episode on protein synthesis. And this is where it all happens. So synthesis, it means just to make. Okay, so when you are synthesizing, you're making something. And so you see this word synthesis a lot in biology because lots of things are made in biology. Right, last but not least then, we have these orange features. These are membrane bound as well, okay? So that means they're not found in bacteria cells, but they are found in plant and animal cells. And these are the mitochondria. Okay? Now, mitochondria is plural, mitochondrion is the singular, and this is the site of aerobic respiration. Okay, and again, we'll be doing a lesson on aerobic respiration very soon, an episode. And this is where, obviously, oxygen is needed to release energy. Then that energy is then used by the cell to carry out its functions. Now, you'll expect cells that do a lot of things, a lot of energetic things, such as muscle cells contracting, will have a lot of mitochondria because they need a lot more energy. And that's the sort of questions you might be faced in an exam, is to suggest what features cells might contain based upon their function. So it's very important that not only do we name these features, but we also describe what they do and try and relate it to other aspects of biology as you go through the course. Okay, so that's an introduction then to the animal cell. In our next section, we're going to have a look at the plant cell. So let's go. Welcome back to part 2 of this episode, and now we're going to be focusing on the structures of plant cells. Now, plant cells share many features with animal cells. They're both cells that contain membrane-bound organelles, so they're going to share a lot of features. But there are 3 additional features that you need to be able to say are found in plants only and not in animal cells. You need to also be able to describe their functions. So if we look on the screen now, we've got ourselves a typical plant cell. First thing you'd notice is that it's a little more angular in shape. So typically plant cells have a lot more kind of regular shapes, so rectangles or hexagons and that sort of shape, as opposed to the fried egg look. You'll also notice that there are some similarities, some features that we've already named. And there are a couple that we still need to name now. So why don't you go ahead and copy yourself down a plant cell, and we're going to label up what they are and what their functions are now. So we're going to begin by looking at those features that we've already mentioned. So I'm just going to label them up here. I'm not going to label up what their functions are as well, but we're just going to label them just so you know that they are there. So we're going to start with the green line here. And this green line is, of course, the cell membrane. And it does the same job as it does in the animal cell. It controls what goes in and what goes out of the cell. Next, we have a nucleus. And again, the nucleus of a plant cell contains genetic information in the form of DNA arranged as chromosomes in the same way that animal cells do. Also, we have our mitochondria, which you can see here. This is something that sometimes students miss. They think that mitochondria are only found in animal cells or that plants don't respire and therefore don't need them. That's incorrect. You've got to remember that plant cells also respire, and so plant cells need a lot of mitochondria. And indeed, there are some plant cells that do quite a lot of activity, lots of movement of molecules, for example, into the phloem. And these sort of cells require lots of mitochondria because they require lots of energy. You'll also notice that this plant cell contains ribosomes. Okay, so these little circles here, ribosomes. Again, these are the site of protein synthesis, and plant cells make proteins too. Okay, so there are, one more. We forgot about the cytoplasm. Of course, plant cells have cytoplasms too. They are cells, and they have material in which all the other features are found floating around in, and of course, reactions occur here. Okay, so 3 more items then we need to mention when it comes to the plant cell. So let's begin with these green structures down here. Okay, these green structures, they look a little bit like mitochondria, but they have quite a different role. These are the chloroplasts. Okay, and the chloroplast, we're going to label up now what its function is the site of photosynthesis. Okay, now earlier we talked about what synthesis means. Protein synthesis is to make proteins. Synthesis is another reaction that makes things, and photo uses light. So photosynthesis uses light to make sugars, which we'll look at in another episode. So the chloroplast then is a site of photosynthesis. Okay, it contains chlorophyll. Contains chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is the pigment that's needed for this reaction to happen. And again, cells in the plant which are exposed to a lot of light, so in the leaves, for example, are going to find a lot of chloroplasts, whereas cells that are not found in the main photosynthesizing parts of the plant won't find many, or indeed any at all. Okay, next we have the outsides here, which I've colored in a kind of dark purple. This is the cell wall. Now the cell wall's function, okay, is to maintain shape, okay, of the cell. And it's made of cellulose. Now cellulose is a long-chain sugar. You need to name this. Okay, so it's made of cellulose. Okay, so it's a long chain of glucose molecules, and cellulose is the molecule that makes up the cell wall. Now you notice, of course, it ends in O's. That gives you a clue as to what type of molecule it is. It's a carbohydrate, like glucose is also a carbohydrate. Last but not least, we have the grey area here, and that is our vacuole, our permanent vacuole. So I'm going to label it up here as permanent vacuole. Vacuole, excuse me. What am I saying? O-L-E, vacuole. And the vacuole is filled with sap, so sort of a watery, sugary material, and it functions as a way to support the cell's shape. Okay, so it supports the shape of the cell. Okay, supports the shape. Okay, and it will ensure cells are turgid. Okay, T-U-R-G-I-D, turgid. Okay, and a plant cell is described as being turgid when it is swollen. Okay, when it's nice and firm. Okay, so if you think about a plant standing nice and tall, all the cells there are turgid. Okay, and the vacuole will reduce or increase in size in order to change the sort of the swollenness, if you like, of the cell. And that has a particular use in, for example, guard cells. Guard cells, which we'll look at in a future lesson, of course, controls the stomata of the leaf, and they will swell and not swell in order to open and close the stomata. And so the vacuole plays an important role in ensuring that happens. Okay, so as you can see then, the plant cells, very interesting class of cell, contains all those features we've talked about with the animal cell, with the addition of 3 more. Okay, the cell wall made of cellulose, the vacuole containing sap that swells to control the shape of the cell, and the chloroplast, which contains chlorophyll, which is the site of photosynthesis. Okay, so in our next and final part of this lesson, we are going to be looking at the bacterial cell. So whenever you're ready, let's continue. So welcome back to our third and final part of this episode, where we're going to shift our focus now onto the structure of bacterial cells. Now, bacterial cells are different from animals and plant cells in so much that they do not have membrane-bound organelles. That means they have no nuclei, no mitochondria, no chloroplasts. So they're far simpler in their structure. Now, we call them prokaryotic cells and animal and plant cells eukaryotic cells, although you don't need to know those terms for your National 5 biology. So we're going to look at the structure now. By all means, pause the video and sketch down a copy yourself. And then when you're ready, we'll go through each of the structures in turn. So we're going to start with what we started with the other 2 cells, and that is, of course, the green line here, which is this cell membrane. Okay. Once again, controls what goes in and out of the cell. We have our cytoplasm, which is our jelly-like substance in the middle. Cyto meaning cell. So cytoplasm, same function. Reactions occur here, and you find everything else floating around there. You'll notice that there's no nucleus. Instead, we have a free-floating DNA here. So there's no nucleus. Instead, it's free-floating DNA. Okay, and it's a long loop. Okay, so it's not a chromosome, so not straight long DNA strips. Instead, it is just a sort of big mess of a loop of DNA. So free-floating DNA, not chromosomes. Okay. Now, whilst we're on the topic of genetic information, you'll notice as well that there are a few other little circlets of DNA here. And these are found exclusively in bacterial cells, and we call them plasmids. Now, a plasmid is a small circlet of DNA. And it will code for proteins, just like DNA found on the main sort of free-floating DNA. And it's very useful for us, actually, because we are able to take out plasmids from bacteria, manipulate them in some way, add genes into them, and then return them to bacteria, and then the bacteria will grow and make the proteins that we want them to. We'll cover that in a future episode when we look at genetic engineering later on in Unit 1. If we continue our cells, we can see that they also have ribosomes. Okay. Again, the site of protein synthesis. And you'll notice it also has a cell wall. Now, this is a slightly different type of material to plant cells. Okay. It has a cell wall, but it's not cellulose. Now, National 5 level, we don't need to name what it is. It's a peptidoglycan, so it's a kind of sort of protein carbohydrate sort of capsule cell wall. But for your National 5, you just need to know that it has a cell wall and that it is not cellulose. So it is different to the cell wall you find in plants. Finally, we have this little tail here, and it's not uncommon for bacteria to have these little tails, and we call them flagellum. Okay, so this is like a tail-like structure. Okay, for mobility. Okay, so we have now covered the 3 cell types you need to know for your National 5 biology. Okay, welcome to the question times section of our episode. And today's question comes from the past paper 2018, section 2, question 1. And what you will normally find is the first question or two will be about cell structures. And more often than not, they're going to be asking you about naming or describing the properties or functions of these different features. So, typical question then is asking you to choose 2 of the structures labeled on the diagram and quite simply state their function. Second question, question B, is a basic maths question. It's going to ask you to work out the average size of a cell with the information you've been given there. Now, just a word of advice for the first section, only name the function of a structure that's featured on the cell. Don't invent something. Don't go and describe what a chloroplast does because it's not on the image. Okay, so read the question carefully. And so 3 marks should take you no more than 4 minutes. So pause the video, have a go, and when you're ready, we'll go through the answers. Okay, welcome back. So let's now have a look and see what the answers are to this question. So the first one then is to choose 2 of the functions, 2 of the structures, and to name the functions that are there. So we'll start with the mitochondrion. So remember, mitochondrion is the singular for mitochondria. Okay, so if we do the mitochondria first. Okay, the mitochondrion. The function there is the site of aerobic respiration. Do excuse my handwriting there. So aerobic respiration is the function there. You need to say aerobic. Next, we have the ribosome. So maybe you've chosen the ribosome. Ribosome here is protein synthesis. If you say to make proteins, you'll probably still get the mark, but it's good practice to use the correct terminology. Synthesis means to make. You might have chosen the cytoplasm. So you've got to name it and tell me what it does. And you can say that reactions occur here. Reactions occur here. Okay. And last but not least, you could have said the cell membrane. Okay. And again, be very clear as to which one you're saying. The cell membrane's function is to control what enters and leaves. Okay. Great. So, any 2 of those for 2 marks. Remember, don't invent something. Don't talk about the nucleus. Don't talk about any chloroplast that might have been there. Okay, because they're not labeled on the diagram. Next question. The field of view of light microscope measures 2 millimeters in diameter. 20 plant cells were counted in a line across the diameter. 1 millimeter is 1,000 micrometers. Calculate the average size of cell in micrometers. So we know that there are 20 cells lined up and the total length of that is 2 millimeters. You're told that 1,000 micrometers is a millimeter. So we know that 20 cells equals 2,000 micrometers. Okay, you don't really need a calculator for this at all. Just score those out. Okay, so 2 equals 200. So 1 must equal 100 micrometers. And there you go. Nice and simple. There's the answer. So there we have it. We've now covered the cell structures of animal cells, plant cells, and bacterial cells. And I hope you managed to get all 3 marks in that little past paper question at the end.
If you've enjoyed this episode and you found it very useful, please do like and subscribe, and please do leave a comment if you've got any questions about any of these structures that we've talked about today. And don't forget to tell your friends as well, so that if they are struggling with their biology revision, they know where to come to get biology explained. But thanks for tuning in, and please do look out for our next episode. Take care wherever you are now. Goodbye.